So my intros are all usually terrible, and I think today is no different. This will be very obvious because the next line will be me talking about when the anime and the movies came out. Puella, Magi, Madoka, Magica is an anime that was released in 2011. The recap movies Beginnings and Eternal came out in 2012. The third original movie, Rebellion, came out in 2013, and while Walpurgis Rising, the fourth movie, is slated to drop in 2024. If you've been around the internet long enough, you've probably come across that one famous clip of Madoka where, well, if you know, you know. If you haven't seen it, then congratulations, because that's one less spoiler for you to deal with, which means you're doing better off than I was, because spoilers were the name of the game for me when it came to Madoka. I was exposed to quite a lot of spoilers in regards to Madoka, and to say that this fact greatly warped my viewing experience would be an understatement. However, despite the negative connotations surrounding spoilers, these spoilers actually enhanced my experience for the most part. There's a couple things here and there that were negatively impacted by having prior knowledge of it, but it wasn't anything that I'd say brought down the experience as a whole. I'm not out here trying to preach the goodness of spoilers to everybody, because I would say that my time with Madoka is an exception rather than the baseline when it comes to how spoilers should impact an experience. The series is great. This isn't some revolutionary take. If you haven't seen it, then go watch it. The art direction and atmosphere are top-notch, the writing's great, the music's great. It's just really good, so go watch it. The first and second movies aren't really too special, but the third movie goes pretty hard. Here's your spoiler warning, by the way. Everything beyond this point will contain spoilers. In this video, we'll be covering the main anime as well as the three movies. There won't be any spin-off stuff covered in this video, so I'd like to offer sincere apologies to fans of, and I'm just gonna take a sip of my drink before I try this. Okay, to fans of Kazumiya Magica, The Innocent Malice, Oniko Magica, Mariko Magica, Different Story, Madoka Magica, Homeru's Revenge, Onko Magica, Extra Story, Homura Tamura, Suzuki Magica, Tart Magica, The Legend of Jean d'Arc, Oniko Magica, Sadness Spray, Magical Magica, Wraith Arc, Madoka Magica, Portable, Madoka Magica, The Battle Pentagram, Magia Record, Puella, Magia Record, Puella, Magi, Madoka, Magica, Side Story, Another Story, The Eve of Awakening, Dawn of a Shallow Dream, and I'm sure like 30 other things that I failed to discover. Okay, off we go. Obviously, spoilers suck because no one likes having a pleasant surprise ruined. Pretty much most of the spoilers came from when a gacha game that I play got a Madoka collab. I knew that Madoka becomes a magical girl at some point and has a bow. I knew the designs on pretty much all of the witches with the very specific and important exception of one. I knew that the Walpurgis was supposed to be a big deal. I knew that Omura, in my notes I have it written as, goes Menhera mode, but we'll just say she destabilizes at some point. And I knew that Kyubey is evil. This last one was one that I spoiled for myself because I had googled him out of curiosity, and one of the first things that popped up was that Kyubey was the antagonist of the anime. So exactly how did knowing spoilers improve the experience? All things considered, I was pretty lucky in that most of the spoilers I came across were devoid of actual story elements, so that part of the experience had quietly remained nice and intact. No I am your father moments. But something important to consider with spoilers is that having access to them split the experience in two. One half of the story became about filling in the gaps between the spoilers, but the other, much more important half of the story became about anticipating the inevitable arrival of these spoilers. I really cannot emphasize the importance of that second half enough. Even calling it the second half isn't giving it enough credit for how much it warped the entire experience. The moment I noticed a single clue that might lead into one of these spoilers, the stress and dread began to mount. The fact that Madoka isn't some bubbly, light-hearted fairy tale where everybody gets the good ending only doubled down on this feeling. We'll talk more about this feeling as we get into specific cases of it later on, but for an example, we can talk about Mami's death inside the barrier of the Candy Witch. The instant that I noticed the first signs of candy and sweets inside the aesthetic of the barrier, I realized that we were quickly approaching that infamous scene. So, watching Mami and Madoka slowly talk through the barrier and chat the entire time went from being a little tense to almost agonizingly so. The part when Mami begins talking about how she doesn't have to fight witches alone anymore, and that Madoka should wish for a big feast with a big cake to celebrate becoming a magical girl is like the anime becoming aware of my own growing nerves and deciding to capitalize on it by having that scene be really sappy in order to make it as grating and painful as possible to sit through. There's this thick fog of helplessness that permeates throughout the entirety of Madoka, which made anything that I even remotely recognize appearing out of this fog become all the more terrifying. I think spoilers enhancing the experience by adding a special layer of stress to it is unique to Madoka specifically. This isn't the first time I've been exposed to spoilers for an anime and ended up making a video on it. That honor goes to Jujutsu Kaisen of all things. And while I have grown to really not like that video, an important thing to note is that having spoilers for Jujutsu Kaisen basically changed nothing about the experience. I could only speculate as to why this is the case, but I won't do that here and instead go back to Madoka by pointing out that I think Madoka's pacing is on the slow side. This isn't inherently a bad thing, and I think the series actually benefits from having a slower pacing. When anything begins to go bad in Madoka, it always takes a little while before the downward spiral completes itself. Mami's death might be the one and only exception to this, since it's intended to act as a defining pivot point for the tone of the series, which is emphasized by the ending music changing as well. But things like Sayaka's collapse, Kyoko's shift in perspective, Kyubei's insistence, the truth behind Homura, and Madoka's choice all take several episodes to fully process, with the very last one taking the entire series to do so. Madoka's slower pacing means that anticipation is at an all-time high, leading to moments of stress and revelations becoming much stronger as a result. I think Madoka's defining quality is that it's a very stressful, nerve-wracking anime, and it's all thanks to how the story takes advantage of this decision to go with a slower pacing. Before we dive into the thick of things, let's do a bit of generalized rambling about art direction in Madoka. Now, this isn't something I usually comment on, since my knowledge about art direction can be summarized as I like it or I don't like it. I can pretty confidently tell you that I like it here. In fact, I really like it. It's already put on display from episode 1 with the opening sequence of the end of the world, as well as the preview into a witch hunt we get at the end of the episode. These witch hunts are the most obvious thing to point out when it comes to the defining artistic feature of the series. How they managed to put it all together and make it look this good is beyond me. There's a strange mix of complete and utter chaos with a mysterious kind of coherency, which makes what should be a complete visual dumpster fire strangely enjoyable. Like, it's clearly not just a series of random images that was haphazardly glued together into a collage. A theme is very visibly present throughout each and every single one of these barriers. The Candy Witch's barrier is heavily dominated by imagery of both candies as well as hospitals and medicine. Something like the Shadow Witch has a very unique visual style that sets it far apart from anything else in the series. And my favorite of these, that being Sayaka's Witch's barrier, is ostentatious in its display, with an amazing build-up to the moments leading up to the orchestra's reveal, but it also indicates that the formation of these barriers is heavily linked to the despair that the witches were born from, and that there is a subtle story that's being told in each and every single one of these. The animation of the witches is also fantastic too, because there's a very unnatural flow to it all. Something like the garden and Sayaka's witches have a very stilted, clunky animation, while Walpurgis not just floats through everything and responds to nothing Homura's throwing at it. Homura's witch in Rebellion, I think, has the most memorable animation to it, with it being a slow and steady death march approaching the guillotine. All of this stuff is great, but one thing that really helped make watching these witch hunts feel so interesting is the fact that the animation everywhere else is kind of plain. I don't mean to say that I think the animation everywhere else is bad, but things like the characters' facial expressions and movement are far more basic. I actually really like this as an artistic decision because it helps keep the humans and witches as separated and contrasted as possible. That way the forays into the barriers feel all the more overwhelming. The clean, postmodern aesthetic of Mitakihara contributes to this too, since it's a different method by which the barriers have something to contrast against. It's some genuinely very cool stuff that I'm sure I failed to do justice to, but if there's one thing to take away from these last couple minutes, it's that I like the art direction in the series quite a lot. Oh, and one more thing to note in regards to art before we move along is the very opening of episode 1. It's got those curtains that spread open to begin the episode and show the title card. I legitimately got jump scared by these curtains. The scare was purely due to the aesthetic. I knew that there was going to be something fucked up about the series because I was already privy to the monster design, and I've seen the same Mami clip that everyone else on the internet has seen. So I went into the series expecting something out of the ordinary, but I figured we'd be eased into it rather than it being thrown right at me from the first few seconds. In hindsight, I really love it, but those curtains still make me feel really uneasy. It's hard to pick and choose a single character to begin discussing simply because there isn't a single character we can easily isolate. A lot of the main characters in Madoka are very closely linked together in some way, shape, or form, and discussion of one character will immediately bleed into the discussion of another. There isn't really a clear and definitive starting point. I'm going to remain unsatisfied no matter who I begin with, so we do need to start somewhere. If I had to pick a favorite character, I think that prestigious title probably has to go to Sayaka. It helps a lot that she has the most viscerally illustrated arc out of any character, and that she also has an extremely impactful ending. The process of Sayaka coming to a decision and selecting her wish is carefully laid out in a step-by-step process, where you can see her ideas shifting from one to another. Well, a better way to put it would be that her wish doesn't actually change, but rather her perspective on her own wish does. Sayaka never says her wish out loud if my memory serves correctly, but it's still really obvious to any viewer that's even paying the slightest attention, which is that her wish is to fully heal Kamijo. There's this really interesting moment in episode 3 when Sayaka is questioning Kyubei about the logistics of using her wish on somebody else's behalf when Mami chimes in by asking her if Sayaka wants to make Kamijo's wish come true, or does she want to be the person that made his wish come true? First of all, damn, bro. That shit cuts deep. But second of all, I love how brutally straightforward this statement is, and part of me kind of even wishes for an even worse ending where somehow Sayaka's wish doesn't make Kamijo's true wish be granted, and her ending is all the more miserable for it. Anyways, you can see Mami's words take full action in episode 4 when Kamijo cuts into Sayaka in an even more brutal fashion about how Sayaka is torturing him by constantly exposing him to music that he can't play anymore. And at the end of that scene, when Sayaka says that miracles are real, you can see that shift take place. She had been holding off on her wish because she didn't want to simply become the person that granted Kamijo's wish, but here Sayaka now fully believes that she is no longer spending her wish for herself, but rather to truly grant Kamijo what he wants. And from here on out is when the anime makes an example out of Sayaka to demonstrate the life cycle of a magical girl to the viewer. It's initially joy brought upon by their newfound powers and purpose, which inevitably spirals away into despair. The hope they bring with their powers always gives birth to despair. We see it with Kyoko, we see it with Homura, and of course we see it with Sayaka. My favorite example of the bunch, I'm sure to the surprise of nobody, is Sayaka, and I'm sure that a lot of it can be credited to the aforementioned fact that our arc is so much more detailed. But outside of that, there's something about the much more grounded nature of her arc that feels so much more weighty to me than Kyoko's or Homura's. That's not a roundabout way of me saying that I don't like their arcs, by the way. I really like both of them, I just like Sayaka's the most. The anime goes out of its way to fill Sayaka with as much good vibes as possible by very clearly having her demonstrate the feeling of a weight being lifted off her shoulders, with this being topped off by the little violin recital Kamijo puts on at the roof of the hospital. But of course it all has to come crashing back down to earth when Kyoko enters the picture. I really love how vicious and selfish Kyoko's approach to the magical girl business is. It clashes very heavily against Madoka and especially Sayaka's idealistic approach. Some of the things that Kyoko's preaching to Sayaka about breaking Kamijo's arms and legs is just batshit insanity that no one in their right mind would even consider. However, I think a contrast of this degree is absolutely necessary because of how peaceful Madoka wants everything and everyone to be. She literally says that Sayaka and Kyoko should talk about their problems and solve it that way instead of putting their lives at risk in a fight. Madoka has this naivete of an outsider when it comes to addressing the triangle of Sayaka, Homura, and Kyoko, where she wants the conflict to be solved as amicably as possible and believes that she can convince everybody. But all three of the magical girls she's trying to convince have such strongly established opinions of one another and how a magical girl should act that Madoka's efforts pretty much all go to waste. The selfishness and cruelty of Kyoko's ways, Homura's stoic and matter-of-fact approach, and Sayaka's reckless sense of justice have all done more to influence and agitate those involved compared to Madoka's innocent bystanding. One of the things that Madoka has said in a previous episode is that she believes that she is weak and has done nothing noteworthy, and I think the extreme nature of Kyoko's perspective and just the very strongly upheld opinions of all the magical girls is one of the best ways in which the series highlights this. Didn't I tell you that discussion of one character will bleed right into the discussion of others because of how interlinked everybody is? Now that we've dropped Madoka into this spaghetti of details, we may as well talk about one of my runner-ups for favorite scene in the anime where Sayaka really rips into Madoka for being a bystander in episode 8. But before we do, there is some precious context that is important here. For anyone that hasn't watched the anime, I'm just going to very briefly explain the concept of soul gems as well as who Hitomi is so that the rest of this little chunk of the video can make a bit more sense. And I promise that this is the last time that I will do this. Okay, so when somebody becomes a magical girl, a soul gem is created. It's essentially an external vessel within which a magical girl's soul is contained. As time passes and a magical girl uses their powers, a soul gem becomes polluted, and these can only be cleansed by using grief seeds, which are required from witches. The magical girl's physical body no longer contains the soul, so if the soul gem is taken away from its perspective, So if the soul gem is taken away from its respective body, then the body goes limp like a puppet being discarded. We find out about all of this in episode 6 when Madoka decides to throw Sayaka's soul gem off a bridge. Hitomi is a side character who is a non-magical regular girl that's friends with Sayaka and Madoka. In episode 7, Hitomi tells Sayaka that she has been super crushing on Kamijo because she respects Sayaka's feelings for Kamijo too and gives Sayaka 24 hours to confess to Kamijo before Hitomi does. Sayaka ends up not confessing to Kamijo because she doesn't see herself as deserving of a loving relationship with another human being because she no longer considers herself a human. Hitomi ends up confessing to Kamijo as Sayaka watches from the shadows in episode 8. Ugh. Jesus Christ. So, with that in mind, back to Sayaka. After learning about the truth behind the soul gems, Sayaka experiences an existential crisis. I am out of breath, I'm sorry. This wasn't something I gave much thought to immediately when the truth about the soul gems was dropped, but there is a kind of horror to this idea of feeling like some fundamental part of yourself and identity has been ripped away from you and thrust back into your hands in the most literal way possible, now permanently detached from who you are. And I do think Kyubey makes a very valid point at the start of episode 7 in that humans aren't even aware of their own souls, so is it even a problem if you never knew that your own soul was taken out of you? Setting that killer writing prompt aside, one small moment that I really enjoyed was when Sayaka admits to almost regretting what she had done, and this regret isn't that she became a magical girl, but rather that she has wondered what her life would be like if she let her friend Hitomi die when she was touched by a witch. It's a straightforward, honest admission of her feelings that I think does a far, far better job than anything with excessively flowery language could ever accomplish. Sayaka wants somebody else to experience the despair that she has been going through because it might just alleviate some of it off of her. The person that Sayaka threw her entire life away for is now walking away with somebody else, and she can't bring herself to stop this from happening. The worst part about this is that this person will be none the wiser about Sayaka's sacrifices. And now we can actually get back to episode 8, when Sayaka tells off Madoka for choosing not to be a magical girl despite having enormous potential according to literally everybody, and that Madoka should stop pretending to understand from the sidelines. In general, I really like all the bits throughout the series where people are willing to skip beating around the bush and trying to sugarcoat something, instead opting to be entirely and brutally honest. It makes those moments of conflict feel quite real, like somebody is genuinely pissed off about the happenings. Madoka just sits there and watches her suffer instead of becoming all-powerful. In the moment, Sayaka is placing all the blame onto Madoka, and that Madoka could easily be the one to ease Sayaka's suffering. This completely disregards the fact that Madoka becoming a magical girl won't do anything to change the fact that Sayaka's entire being is locked into a soul gem. I really love this scene because thinking about it for like 2 seconds makes you realize that Madoka becoming a magical girl will solve nothing. Sure, Madoka could spend her wish on resolving the issue, but this is never brought up by Sayaka. Any mention of using a wish to fix Sayaka is always Madoka's idea. But this doesn't matter to Sayaka because she has become so distraught that she just desperately needed somebody to take her emotions out against. You can see the regret washing over her later as she walks away too. This scene also reminds me of the parts where Kyubey says that only magical girls have the right to criticize other magical girls in episode 4, as well as when Homura says that grief seeds only belong to magical girls and that those that aren't should stay away from them in episode 3. There's something quite vulnerable and human about this scene that leaves a very strong impression on me. Add the cherry on top that this is the last time Sayaka and Madoka will ever see each other in the anime, and it all wraps together into just being an outstanding scene. As a quick side note, another short scene that complements this one really well is when Hitomi confesses to Kamijo and Sayaka watches from the sidelines. We actually never get to hear what Hitomi and Kamijo talk about here, but I think that's great. It's a good way to showcase Sayaka being sucked into her own depressing world and closing out everything and everyone else to a point that what actually happens isn't anywhere near as important as what Sayaka thinks is happening, and her interpretations of these events further reinforces the walls of her mental echo chamber. So now that we've addressed one of the runner-ups to my favorite scenes, it now seems appropriate to discuss the actual favorite, that being the reveal of Sayaka's witch. When I was talking about spoilers earlier, I mentioned that I knew the designs on pretty much all of the witches with the very specific and important exception of one. Sayaka's witch is that very specific and important exception. Because I already knew the designs on so many of the witches, none of the reveals were ever a surprise to me except for this one. I figured that since I knew about the big bad Walpurgisnacht, I should be able to recognize every witch served on my plate. Sayaka turning into a witch by itself wasn't a huge shocker because the anime hints at it pretty heavily, especially with the end of the train scene. I figured she'd end up becoming the school witch, perhaps as a representation of a desire to return to simpler times when she didn't know any better about the truth of this world. So when the anime throws this fucking monstrosity at my face, it was the single most baffling moment in the entire anime. This was easily the moment I was affected the most by the spoilers, and I love it. Everything about the events that take place within Sayaka's barrier is just incredible. While Sayaka's barrier might be the most artistically coherent of the ones we've seen so far, part of that coherency does come from the fact that we know her story pretty well, so we're able to connect the little bridges of themes and symbols here and there. That being said, I still think it has the best spectacle out of all the barriers we've seen. Maybe it's because of the understanding and coherency I just spoke of moments ago, or maybe it just inherently feels like a better spectacle purely through vibes. Whatever the case may be, I'm still a huge fan of it. Sayaka's witch design is also my favorite of the bunch as well, and it very much has a final boss kind of feel to it compared to all the other witches we've seen so far. I would say maybe even more so than Walpurgisnacht, but that might just be because of the surprise factor I talked about. Her witch is absolutely enormous, and the awkward, stuttering movement of its arms makes it all the more intimidating by giving it a more alien feel, which is exacerbated by motions of it conducting the ethereal orchestra. The way that it also slides around smoothly rather than having any semblance of actually moving itself around further adds to that alien feeling. It's honestly a phenomenal design in every possible way. Which means we get to now talk about Kyoko for a second. We gave her a brief shout out earlier when talking about how her vicious and selfish take on magical girls clashed with the more idealistic takes of Sayaka and Madoka, and how I think it complements those characters very nicely. The more I watched Kyoko, the more I found myself enjoying this character. Her backstory, aside from being thematically interesting and presented well, does fit in very nicely with how this character acts. She became a magical girl to help her family, and that ended in a tragedy, so now she exclusively uses her powers for her own gains. It was nice to see an actual character underneath all the cruelty that defined her early on, and that there was a legitimate motivation as to everything she did besides just the story requiring a tertiary villain after Kyubey and the witches. Once the truth behind the soul gems is out in the open at the end of episode 6, Kyoko in particular reacts to it in an interesting way. Sayaka is feeling understandably very upset about the matter, and Kyoko finally approaches her to just talk nicely instead of trying to kill her or suggest breaking somebody's bones. Kyoko shares her backstory, then tries to cheer up Sayaka by telling her to stop worrying about other people and just do whatever she feels like doing, man. Sayaka respectfully declines this suggestion and says that she doesn't regret anything she's done because Sayaka doesn't want to cheapen the feelings she cherishes. She can do wonderful things with her power if she uses it right. That little addition at the end is the most important thing to come out of this scene for me. Claiming that she can use her power right implies that there's a wrong way to use one's magical powers. The most defining thing about Sayaka as a magical girl is her utter refusal to partake in the usage of grief seeds after hearing Kyoko's perspective in episode 5 about how people should suffer so that more witches can be born to produce more grief seeds. So I don't think it's that much of a stretch to say that this practice of Sayaka's is what she views to be the right way of doing things. In episode 6, Sayaka shows a lot of hatred towards both Homura and Kyoko, especially towards the former for their involvement in the vicious cycle. Magical girls simultaneously protect and profit off of ordinary people's sufferings, and they must partake in one side of this cycle in order to continue the other. Grief seeds must be collected from witches in order to remain strong, and magical girls must remain strong in order to protect the ordinary people from witches. Kyoko, in her own selfish and initially cruel methods, perpetuates the cycle. Homura, in her own mysterious and stoic ways, perpetuates the cycle. Even the greatly respected Mami perpetuated the cycle, but she's never put under any criticism by Sayaka because, well, she died for Sayaka before Sayaka knew about the truth. I'm sure if Mami survived the battle inside the Candy Witch's barrier, then she wouldn't be exempt from criticism at this point. That balance of hope and despair cancels out to 0. But, there's still a question kind of hanging around, which is, why does Kyoko begin to care about Sayaka anyways? My best guess has to be that once the Soul Gem Truth Bomb is dropped, Kyoko maybe doesn't feel as invincible as she once did, and now that her feet are firmly back on the ground, she has once again developed sympathy for fundamentally human issues. Sayaka would be the one most affected by the events of that night, so Kyoko checks in just to make sure she's doing well. That being said, Kyoko seems to still be holding onto her core beliefs during the church scene, which is why it ends up being the specific advice she imparts. Yet as the anime progresses, you can see Kyoko's own core beliefs change. They've even changed a bit during the church scene. When Sayaka asks why Kyoko is here trying to guide her after talking all about acting only for yourself, Kyoko doesn't refute the implications as if she also sees the irony in the situation. And as Kyoko watches Sayaka spiral deeper and deeper into despair, she cares more and more about trying to save her. Watching Sayaka fight against the Shadow Witch is such a surreal experience for this exact reason. Before she fought the witch, Sayaka was just talking to Madoka about all the despair she's been experiencing lately and brought to tears by it, yet in the fight, she's like a maniac, just hacking and slashing her way through the Shadow Witch with little to no other emotion besides violence. And at the end of the fight, Sayaka attributes this to the lessons she got from Kyoko at the church. As Sayaka doesn't partake in the usage of grief seeds, her soul gem gets more and more polluted, which exactly matches the pace at which her life is falling apart around her. From a purely technical standpoint, taking the Madoka versus rule into consideration, there probably is no direct correlation between the magical girl's soul gem being polluted and their life falling apart, since time passing and the expenditure of powers is what causes the pollution. But for all of you eagle-eyed viewers out there with a PhD in anime literacy, I'm sure you all noticed the super subtle symbolism that is the purity of a soul gem corresponding to the amount of hope/despair in somebody's life. And of course, when magical girls have fully succumbed to despair, they turn into a witch. Cube has this insane mic drop at the end of episode 8 when he says, and obviously versions may differ depending on how your subtitles are handled, but in this world, women who have yet to fully grow are called girls, right? In that case, it only makes sense that you, who will one day grow into witches, should be called magical girls. Like, holy shit, this line is just straight fucking fire from start to finish. So good. This was also one of those things that I just so happened to not encounter spoilers on, which made the Cube mic drop hit even harder. Kyoko and Madoka enter Sayaka's berry to try and save her, and I really like that the emotion weighing down upon Kyoko here is responsibility. Their first encounter led to Sayaka abstaining from grief seeds, while her later attempt to help failed to get across, if not making the entire situation worse. As Homura enters the barrier, Kyoko says something along the lines of how she made her go along with it, or that she shouldn't have brought her into this. There's an ambiguity to Kyoko's statement here that I've grown to really like, because both interpretations of it make a lot of sense to me. This is clearly supposed to be in reference to saying that Kyoko should have never brought Madoka into the barrier with her, but I also kind of get the vibes that Kyoko seems to subconsciously recognize the role she played in Sayaka's downward spiral. I don't think this is the case, but it's still cool to me nonetheless. You could see Sayaka's death inside the barrier as her completely shedding her old beliefs as she puts Sayaka to rest, or karmic punishment for pushing an increasingly fragile person to a point of no return, or maybe even a little bit of both. Perhaps the silently cruelest thing about this all is that once episode 9 is done and dusted, we hear nothing of how Hitomi and Kamijo are doing. From a practical perspective of story progression, we have no reason to see these people again because they won't be contributing anything to it. However, there is a sort of existential cruelty to the idea of the person Sayaka threw away her life for being completely oblivious to her fate and just fading out of the story, almost like the world has stepped past her in order to continue setting the rest of itself into motion, just another brick to pave the road. And that right there concludes the two characters that were the easiest to talk about, despite me saying that the remaining characters I don't have as much to say on, unfortunately, so I'm sorry, I guess. Discussing Homura, Cube, and Madoka each in isolation is difficult because they're all tied up in the threads of the bigger picture. I find Sayaka and Kyoko to be easier to talk about in isolation because their respective arcs have a definitive endpoint that comes into fruition all on their own without being overly reliant on factors outside of their arcs. Sure, Sayaka's arc is certainly influenced by the existence of Homura and Madoka, but a lot of it finds its footing based off of Sayaka's decision-making and worldview. Kyoko's arc is like a separate layer thinly surrounding Sayaka's, where a lot of it is in reaction to the happenings of Sayaka's arc. Meanwhile, Madoka's arc is completely a response to everybody else's actions, where the entirety of it circles around the inevitability of her choice and how the anime tries to find as many different avenues of influence to exert upon Madoka to shape her decision. Homura's arc is the only reason why the entire story exists in its current state, and she's closely competing with Cube to try and become the greatest influence on Madoka. Cube is linked up with everybody's arcs, with him carrying some level of responsibility in the outcome of all of them, with possibly the exception of Kyoko's. It's all very tightly knit together with the story's threads of time, so despite me saying that discussing these characters in isolation is difficult, I'm still going to do a little bit of that, mostly to cover a couple topics that I think deserve a bit of extra time in the spotlight, but also because it's more convenient for me to get them out of the way right now. I don't feel like there's much to say about Homura for the first half of the anime. In pretty much all of her appearances, she maintains the same mysterious and stoic aura the entire time, no matter who she interacts with, and the only thing we can truly write down about her character is her insistence on preventing Madoka from becoming a magical girl. After being stone-faced for 7 episodes, she finally shows some emotion in episode 8, where she is very distressed about Madoka's lack of self-worth. It's a rather weird scene, partially because Kyubey gets fucking obliterated moments before it, but also because of how different Homura is acting. For first-time viewers, it's a scene that completely lacks any and all context whatsoever, but now that I'm a wizened sage who knows the truth, I've come around to appreciate the scene for the extra meaning it carries behind the curtains. I also enjoy the way in which the new Kyubey analyzes and understands Homura's time-stopping powers, indicating that Homura's source of magical power comes from somewhere outside of Kyubey's jurisdiction. Stepping over to Kyubey, I haven't had the pleasure of greatly disliking a character in a very long time, but Kyubey has reminded me of what it's like to see a well-managed yet despicable character. Character doesn't even feel like the right word to describe Kyubey, as he's more like a universal force than a singular entity. Incubators as a whole are designed to represent the cosmological horror that rules over humanity in the anime's world. Given that this was also another one of the things I was spoiled on, watching any scene involving Kyubey immediately put me on high alert because it only made me wait for the inevitable moment in which he'd finally reveal his true colors and unleash his evilness across the world. There's a kind of cosmic ignorance to the incubators where they can see the big picture so clearly and everything they need for it, but seem completely incapable of even remotely sympathizing with the smallest details. And while I haven't had any criticisms to point towards the anime yet, I will briefly inject little negativity into the video here by saying that Kyubey is at his most despicable when he's just barely tiptoeing on that line of ignorance and disregard. I think this character is at his best when it's obvious that he doesn't understand the emotional damage his words cause. As a result, I'm not a huge fan of the scene where Kyubey begins comparing humans to livestock. While it's intended to point out a bit of hypocrisy to Madoka, it feels more like he's just being actively malicious and trying to hurt somebody's feelings. To sum it all up, I don't like it when Kyubey is mean. And as an added bonus, I really like that shot of Kyubey getting utterly obliterated by Homura. Super satisfying. Die Kyubey. So now we'll start easing into the topics about the 3K characters that I feel are a bit more weighty and substantial to the story as a whole. Obviously, episode 10 is our big reveal when we find out that Homura bites the dust. I really like the way in which these cycles portray the futility of Homura's efforts and the inevitability of Madoka's destiny. A cool detail here is in how little everybody else matters in the retelling of these cycles. Across all 4 of the cycles that we get to see, in the end, Homura and Madoka are the only 2 magical girls remaining. In the first cycle, Mami is killed during the battle against Walpurgisnacht. In the third cycle, Sayaka becomes a witch while Mami and Sayaka are killed by Madoka and Mami respectively. The second cycle does feature Mami, but not in a particularly relevant manner, while the fourth cycle bears no mention of the other magical girls. But regardless, we still only see Homura and Madoka at the end of the world every single time. The obvious takeaway here is that no matter how many times Homura resets the cycle, fate is inexorable. No matter what she does, it will always be Homura and Madoka at the end of the world, and no matter what she does, Madoka will always die and become the most powerful of all witches. One thing that I love here is how Kyubey describes Madoka as the most powerful witch to have ever been born, and that she'll destroy the entire planet in just 10 days, and we never get to see what this witch looks like properly. All we see of Madoka's witch is some towering shadow obscured behind clouds in a barren wasteland. I just love how unfathomable it all feels. Up until episode 10, Homura's existence had always been this weird question mark smeared all over the entire story that the anime just didn't seem particularly keen on answering, and I kind of like this about the anime and how reticent it was about Homura's identity because it adds a nice air of mystery to the experience. The big reveal is also cool in how it helps recontextualize certain scenes like Homura's outburst in episode 8, in which smaller example of this recontextualizing that I enjoyed was something I noticed in the movie when Homura and Madoka are walking together as the sun sets. Madoka says that she will never forget Mami, and Homura responds by saying that knowing this, Mami must be truly happy and that Homura envies Mami. It's one of those scenes that doesn't really mean much on the first watch, but knowing the truth behind the story gives the impression that it's a much more personal moment for Homura than it initially seems. A third example that I really liked is her reaction to Sayaka's death, where Homura doesn't seem particularly bothered. It seems very cold and detached at first until the reveal makes you realize that she's seen Sayaka die in so many timelines that Homura is just desensitized to it now and views it as one more mark on the timeline. Homura tried her best to help Sayaka before Sayaka became a magical girl, but once that happened, her fate was sealed one more time. Switching gears to Kyubey, perhaps the single most despicable thing about this character is all the little contradictions that are sewn into his mannerisms. Kyubey, according to Kyubey, will never ever pressure anybody into signing a contract, but he will never stop talking about Madoka's limitless potential or talk about how all these situations could be fixed if she used a wish. When Sayaka became a magical girl, Kyubey in episode 5 talks about how this is her destiny, but given how omniscient yet ignorant the incubators are, it's probably very reasonable to say that they don't understand the emotional consequences of their words. From a completely objective standpoint, everything that he says is true. Kyubey has not a distaste, but a disregard for human life, and his very cosmological explanation of the larger system within the universe reduces human and human emotions down to a speck on the map. It's a very facts and logic kind of explanation that separates him as far away as possible from any sort of human element. Human suffering is a speck of dust on the map of the universe, just a necessity to counteract entropy. And I really like the word omniscience here, not just to describe the incubators, but to describe the world as a whole within the anime. But this kind of omniscience is on a sort of subconscious, accidental level where the world feels like it's unknowingly creating catalysts to maintain an event that it doesn't realize will inevitably happen. If that makes no sense, that right there is a terribly worded way of saying that it feels like the entire world is pressuring Madoka into making her decision. She is a bystander for so much of the anime. The story is designed in such a way to remove as much agency as possible away from Madoka by both making her extremely hesitant, as well as having Homura intervene as often as possible. So much of the story revolves around trying to add as many different sources of influence to Madoka's decision-making, ranging anywhere from Mami being a role model for the short time that she's around, or Sayaka's downward emotional spiral calling for somebody to come save her. All 4 of the other magical girls change Madoka's perspective on magical girls in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through inspiration or through denying her the opportunity. Episode 4 is particularly great about trying to exert influence over Madoka's decision because it feels like the best example of not one specific entity trying to influence her, but rather the world as a whole coming down upon her. If Madoka didn't see her friend walking by her in episode 4, then she would have never noticed the witch's mark and her friend would have just died in a freak accident, with Madoka having zero involvement in the matter. But the entire scene of Madoka noticing the mark, then following her friend to the factory and witnessing the attempt by the affected mass feels like the whole world grabbing her by the collar and forcing her to watch the events unfold, forcing her to be responsible for their actions. You have the chance to help these people, you have the choice to help these people. Why won't you help these people? And the emotional processing Madoka goes through when captured by the barrier of the television, which exemplifies this feeling of forced responsibility more than anything else, what with Madoka believing that this is the world punishing her for her inaction. Both Homura's backstory and Kyubey's increasing insistence as the series goes on adds that layer of inevitability, weight, and profoundness to Madoka's decision, and that this decision is no longer one she is making for herself, but rather one that the whole world hinges upon. The anime is called Puella, Magi, Madoka, Magica. The Japanese title for the series, Maho Shoujo Madoka Magica, quite literally translates into Magical Girl Madoka Magica. Puella Magi is the same thing except that it's in Latin. The entire anime is built around the existence of magical girls, yet the main character, whose name is literally in the title of the entire thing, constantly has her transformation into a magical girl be delayed over and over, whether it be through her own hesitation or somebody else making a decision for her. So the anticipation continues to build and build for the central question that is strangling the entire plot. What will finally cause Madoka to become a magical girl? There's this one little bit in the 3rd cycle that's shown in episode 10 that I really, really like. It's just a tiny bit of carefully crafted dialogue that I think speaks volumes about the entire story. Your version of this scene may differ slightly due to differences in subtitle sets, but the general gist of it is that Madoka, in her dying moments, requests a favor from Homura. The favor is for Homura to go back in time to make sure that Madoka isn't deceived by Kyubey. So I like the way that in which this scene is framed because of how it contextualizes not just this iteration of Madoka's perspective on magical girls, but that of Homura's as well. Describing her own situation as being deceived or fooled implies that there previously was a state of pure innocence or even gullibility to Madoka that caused her to fall into a trap, and given the suffering and tragedy that every single magical girl will experience, it's not difficult to see why Madoka would want to go back to and stay in a time without this misery. It's also now abundantly clear to see how Homura's perspective is influenced by this, as Homura in the present holds a great resentment towards magical girls and the hatred towards the incubators that isn't seen in any of the previous cycles. I don't really have much to pick apart when it comes to the ending, at least until we get around to talking about rebellion. I think Madoka's wish is appropriately beyond humanity as much as the threat of Walpurgisnacht and entropy is. I also think it's pretty great that the solution is simultaneously completely out of reach and within the grasp of humanity. The decision results in a complete rewriting of the universe, while the decision itself was made by a human. I'm not philosophically literate enough to dissect the symbols and themes present here, but I do like that the decision that finally rights the world and saves Madoka involves Madoka being one to create a timeline in which she no longer exists as a present entity. Rather than Homura making the decision to create a new timeline to save one person, that one person is now standing up for themselves to create a new timeline to save everyone else. For how little agency Madoka had throughout so much of the anime, the one major decision she makes for herself is not only the most important one of her life, but the most important one in the entire universe. I'm sure there's a more elegant way to word all of this, but there you go. That's my very shallow and uninformed interpretation of the ending to the Madoka anime. And now it's movie time. Most of the discussion is going to revolve around the third movie, Rebellion, but I do have a couple things to gloss over in regards to beginning and eternity. So, to put it shortly, there are no substantial differences between the anime and the first two movies. In fact, I think that watching the movies is the inferior way to experience this story, and I say this for two reasons. The first is that the movies feel faster paced. I talked earlier about how the anime's slower pacing adds a lot more tension and stress to the experience and how I like that. I can never quite feel the same kind of slow burn or the feeling of letting something settle in during the movies. The second is that since the movies are faster paced, there are a few things that are cut out, and as a result of these things being cut out, it just makes a couple scenes flat out worse than they are in the anime. One example of this is right at the very start of beginning. In episode 1 of the anime, there's that scene of Madoka walking through an empty hallway before stumbling out onto a Walpurgisnacht and Homura at the end of the world. Without context, it feels like a nightmare, and as a result, it makes the moment where Madoka says she feels like she's seen Homura somewhere before have a lot more weight to it. That opening scene isn't in the movie, but Madoka still says she feels like she's seen Homura somewhere before, which just makes the scene feel really jarring and like it's clearly missing something. Another example is the removal of the scene where Mami warns Sayaka about using her wish for somebody else. I really like that scene because it makes the later decision to use the wish for somebody else feel a lot more impactful, but the scene simply loses that impact in the movie. I'll add a caveat here and say that for the two complaints I'm launching at the movie, I obviously had the benefit of being able to watch the anime first, so I could actually notice things when they were missing here and there. If I had just watched the movies and not the anime, then I probably wouldn't have any complaints like these simply because I wouldn't know any better. It's not all entirely two thumbs down for the movies, however. There are a few things in beginning and eternity which I think are worth pointing out, some of these being an improvement over the anime. Eternity begins with a countdown from 10 to 0 that's done in the old film style, and that's neat. But later on, when it's the movie's turn to explore Homura's backstory, it begins by playing the exact same countdown sequence, but in reverse. And I really like that detail. It's so cool. It's so cool to me. One last thing is that there's a scene that's exclusive to the movie. In Eternity, once Sayaka's witch is defeated and Kyoko is dead, there's a scene that spans a couple minutes where Homura is in the middle of God knows where. She and Kyubei talk about stuff like how getting Kyoko out of the picture was vital for Kyubei's plans, and that Homura is the last line of defense against Walpurgisnacht. It's a fine scene, I suppose. I don't really feel that strongly about it, except that the redness of it all does feel a little out of place here. And that's it for movies 1 and 2. Like I said at the top of the video, I think you're better off watching the animes instead of these two movies, but I guess if you're at this point of the video without having watched Madoka, then maybe it doesn't matter as much as I think it does. Anyways, we can now start talking about the third movie, Rebellion, which is by far in a way the most interesting movie, not only because it has 100% new content, but also because that 100% new content is pretty good. So let's rewind things all the way to the past where everything is back to normal. Well, as normal as it gets for the series, that is. Everybody is alive again. Upon initial glance, the movie seems to be taking place in some weird alternate timeline. It starts in the same way that the first episode of the anime did, with Madoka getting ready for school, but Kyubei is there from the very beginning and she seems to get along very well with him. Kyoko is now going to school. Sayaka is still alive and well and has now accepted and moved on from Hitomi and Kamijo having gotten together. Mami's got her head back on and even the Candy Witch came back to celebrate this fact. Homura is still a new transfer student to the school, but this is Twin Tails and Glasses Homura, where she still lacks confidence. There's no witches or wraiths in this setting, with nightmares instead taking their places, with an equally interesting but still distinct visual construction to their hunts to further solidify the differences. The city itself is also a bit different, what with the blimps and the little gremlin dudes running around. All that's interesting, but the best part about all of this is that at the start of the movie, it doesn't rub it in the viewer's face. There are a lot of different things, but it just lets the viewer take it all in at once rather than trying to give them a guided tour to explicitly point out every difference. It might not seem like a big deal when I'm just saying it out loud, but I think it accomplishes one very important thing for the movie's atmosphere. It strongly establishes that critical sense of normalcy. I said that just a bit ago, right? That everything is back to normal. Well, the entire point of the movie from both a story and experience point of view is to do exactly this. It wants to fool both the viewer and Homura into thinking that everything is back to normal and that there's no reason to question the state of things. Everybody is alive, healthy, and happy. What more could you want? The single biggest and sneakiest contributor to this deceit of normalcy that I really like is Cube, or rather, the lack thereof. Cube's lack of significant involvement in the early parts of the movie subtly yet substantially adds to this faux normalcy. Cube doesn't become vocal until Homura's epiphany. He's completely silent until that point. What this adds to the movie is the lack of involvement from an explicitly dedicated antagonist. In the anime, Cube is pretty vocal throughout the entire thing, and it's made abundantly clear that this character either possesses or is part of some greater cosmic power, and his intent for mankind is made pretty crystal clear. For a sizable chunk of Rebellion, Cube is basically just a house pet. The lack of Cube's presence throughout this portion makes it very difficult to pinpoint a definitive antagonist, and through the lack of a definitive antagonist, and the mystery of why everything is back to this suspicious normalcy, it creates the sensation of Homura running in a frustrating circle. Clearly, there's an answer out there somewhere, but there's not a single lead in sight. I dig the bus scene a lot. I think it's one of the best examples of this feeling of running in a frustrating circle. The entirely harsh red void makes for a really stark contrast with the pristine and futuristic aesthetic of the city, and even the city that Kyoko is supposed to be from is shown as nothing but an incomprehensible tower of meaningless shapes. All the faceless denizens of this place are creepy as shit, especially with that sequence in front of the moon where everybody is wearing masks of Kyoko and Homura. I genuinely don't understand what that scene is supposed to be about, but it's terrifying to me nonetheless. I think Kyoko in particular was the best partner for this scene. Obviously, there's the story reason where she's the most changed character, not only by being a student, but also by not trying to kill everybody. But for the experience, I really like Kyoko's presence here, because she, more so than any other character in the series, wears her emotions on her sleeves and very unabashedly expresses them. Like when she jumps down onto the hood of the bus to confront the soulless driver. It helps make the scene feel like the first time in the entire movie where the film is genuinely questioning itself. Similar to this is when Homura grabs Bebe by the dome and runs off with her. It's a moment in which one of the greatest oddities in Rebellion is about to be interrogated and pulled apart for answers, but that's denied a satisfying outcome because of Mami being right on her heels. Sayaka pulling Homura away and having the ominous conversation doesn't offer anything clear either, mostly because Sayaka comes off as being really suspicious by the end, what with her revealing that she retains all the memories and still has her witch with her. The scene where Homura and Madoka talk about the ending of the world in the anime's timeline is another one to add to this list, albeit with a slight difference, that being the fact that it actually feels like the story has made a breakthrough. At first I was extremely concerned that Homura was buying into the goal of the labyrinth, but she still got her marble sorted as she thanks Madoka for her kindness and walks away. Everything the unfortunately amnesiac Madoka says during this scene are the exact things that a Homura in despair wants to hear, but there is an interesting difference in the way that I view this scene during my first and second times with the movie. The first time, it just seems like more of the labyrinth's temptations and that nothing Madoka says here is real. But the second time, knowing the fact that Madoka's memories are tampered with and the fact that this is the real Madoka, it makes you wonder if the words she speaks here are truly from the bottom of her heart. Whatever the case may be, the flowers wilt as Homura falls deeper into the allure of the labyrinth before she snaps out of it with an even stronger will to solve the mystery symbolized by the flowers blooming again and floating away. Another bit of symbolism here is with Homura's hair as Madoka braids it. It seems pretty innocuous on the surface, but I think it's intended to be a sign of the labyrinth trying to return Homura to her innocent and weaker days, but she manages to resist it all. All of these factors and much more combine into an overwhelmingly foggy tone for the movie where it feels like the necessary answers are all within reach, but the movie keeps obscuring it behind a new layer after new layer of mystery. Now, all of this hinges upon having a good resolution to make the viewer's struggle of an experience all feel like it's worth it. It can go horribly wrong, but thankfully I think the resolution's pretty good, so the frustration is all worth it. You're a witch, Homura. Given the fact that I knew of Homura's eventual destabilization in advance, this wasn't much of a surprise to me. I kind of figured something like this would be the case since of all the spoilers that I knew about, this was the only one that had yet to materialize. The visuals are obviously still an absolute treat during the sequence of Homura's epiphany and Kyubey finally speaking up, but I can't really say that I felt all that strongly about Homura becoming, or rather being revealed as a witch. Being able to get a glimpse into the psyche of what remains of a magical girl after they become a witch was pretty interesting, and the fight afterwards is very cool too. I really enjoy the proper return of Sayaka's witch as she summons it with her stand power, and the imagery of Homura's witch marching towards a guillotine is a very imaginative and provocative shot. There are elements to this that I do like quite a lot, but not a whole lot that I feel like would be different from things that I've said about other parts of the series that I liked. Homura's full and proper transformation into a witch is very distressing and disturbing, but perhaps the transition into the hunt was too quick, and as a result, the movie never gave me the opportunity to take it all in and process it during the moment. I feel like I'm coming off as more pessimistic than I really am, but I assure you I really do like both the epiphany and the witch hunt. I'm just not blown away by it like I think the movie wants me to be thanks to the spoilers that I had. But whatever cinema sins I might have accidentally dinged this part of the movie, I can instantly forgive and forget because of the plot twist of Homura betraying Madoka as Madoka arrives to bring salvation. I sure did know that Homura was going to snap at some point, and I figured that by the time the hunt had completed that we were all done with it. But Homura defying the rules of the universe and then hitting us with that mic drop about how she's become the devil is just fucking awesome, man. Homura and Madoka are walking through the school, and as they do, they have a conversation that mirrors the one that took place in episode 1. The dialogue is designed in such a way where everything that's spoken of is both completely true, both within the context of the present universe as well as spanning multiple timelines. I also love the fact that Homura's act of defiance, no matter how impressive it may be, still isn't quite enough to fully suppress the rules of the universe Madoka established. I think it's a pretty brilliantly written scene where it's able to get a lot across in quite an unassuming way. To say that the movie's been turned upside down on its head would be an understatement given that the entire universe has been rewritten again for like the 6th or 7th time just across the freaking anime and the movies. The ending of this movie has Homura put in a position where she is undoubtedly now the antagonist of the series. That brings an interesting duality to the character. On one hand, this is an extremely distraught and unstable character whose entire motivation and emotional state has been laid out to us in a very crystal clear fashion, providing a justification to every single action she has taken in the movie. On the other hand, Homura has taken an absolutely selfish action where the entire universe has been rewritten in order to facilitate a wish that exclusively benefits herself, which stands in stark contrast to Madoka's wish, which rewrote the universe in order to bring salvation to every single magical girl in the world. Homura is more than willing to throw away an opportunity for salvation for a countless number of people just to bring herself joy, and I have nothing but respect for being willing to put such an extreme decision like this one right at the end of the movie. And it's not even like she was a good guy that was influenced and gaslit by some bad guys and joined forces with them. She decides to completely overthrow the entire universe on her own accord and for herself, and I think that's just great. It's great because it makes for an awesome twist, but it's also great because it places the stakes at such an extreme spot for the 4th movie. I can't think of another cliffhanger in any other piece of media ever that felt this extreme. There's also a parallel here between Homura and Madoka too. Madoka became as powerful as she was because the constant time loops brought several timelines worth of karmic burden or destiny or whatever it was right down onto Madoka, and this ended up making her an infinitely powerful magical girl. On the other hand, Homura has several timelines worth of love for Madoka that has been concentrated solely into herself, and by that logic, she also must have become powerful enough to defy the rules of the universe. There's also the fact that witches are created by despair, so it only makes sense that Homura becomes this uber magical girl thanks to a high concentration of positive emotion, and now that I think about it, you could even parallel this with Madoka again, where Madoka became a super ultra mega magical girl because she was filled with the power of hope. One of the things that I was questioning the entire time as I was watching the movie was why it was called Rebellion. I figured it was just to call out Homura rebelling against the witch's labyrinth, but the ending really kicked that idea to the curb and took its spot. So, yeah, I really like this series. Existentialism and horrors beyond our comprehension are appealing topics to me, and I think the series does a great job with both. I'm really bad at conclusions. I'm even worse at them than I am with introductions, which is why I'm just kind of waffling now. Anytime I try to put effort into writing one of these, it just ends up coming off as really corny, and reading them out loud makes me want to punch my own teeth in, so I don't know. I guess I'll just be honest about the fact that I am dog shit at writing conclusions. I guess we'll just end the video there and pick it back up when the next movie drops or something. We'll just let outro me deal with that problem, so I'll see you there. Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to the outro. If you're usual, then you know the drill. But if you're not, well, thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, then please consider liking it and maybe even subscribing to the channel. Every little bit goes a long way. You know, the usual spiel that it is. So as is tradition, I have a batch of miscellaneous notes here that I either came up with while I was editing or I couldn't fit in here or there from the original notes, so here they are. I'm just going to dump them out here so they don't go to waste. The first thing is something I noticed while I was editing about Bebe, which is that Bebe has a lack of significant facial expressions throughout the entire series. It's not really noteworthy early on throughout the runtime of the anime, because look at him, he's a cute little goober, isn't he so cute? But once it's been revealed that he's a harbinger of cosmic things to come, it really sells the fact. It really conveys his inability to sympathize with human beings and their emotions, because no matter what trauma they experience, he's just looking at them with wide open eyes and has that stupid little grin on his face the entire time. While we're still in the anime, there's also the ending scene where Madoka's mom sees her for the last time, which is extremely existentially depressing. Like, it actually got me staying up at night thinking about the scene. Because if you think about it, the last time anybody sees Madoka is a mother seeing her daughter walk into a natural disaster, and not only is this the last time she will ever see her own daughter, but she will also fail to remember her after this event happens, which just, oh man. Like I said at the conclusion of this video, existentialism is a topic that I really like. It's one that it really gets to me, so moments like that really hammer home a lot more emotions than I think a lot of other things do. Jumping over to the movie, specifically Rebellion, some movies I guess it is actually, the gunfight between Mami and Homura about like halfway through the movie, I think it is super sick shit, bro. the way the bullets just streak all over the sky and just cover the whole screen because of time stopping is a really unique visual flavor to the scene that I haven't quite seen anywhere else in anything, really. And when time is unfrozen and the bullets just start flying everywhere and Mami and Homura can't move is just... I don't know what to tell you, man. It's just really fucking cool. It's just a cool fight. I think excluding witch hunts, it's probably my favorite visual moment of the series, which I don't know if that's a hot take or not, but like I don't think it is. It's really cool, man. It's really cool. It's cool. I don't know. It's cool. But the last thing, well, not the last thing, the second to last thing is that at the end of Rebellion, there's a secret post-credit scene, which, first of all, I said it during Heavenly Delusions too. I think please stop making post-credit scenes. I hate them. But it's an extremely haunting scene with Homura just having a grand old time dancing under the moonlight in her newly rewritten universe, while a bruised and battered and beaten Bebe is just like quivering in the grass. There's this extremely spooky but impactful throwback to the multiple times throughout the series where the anime just cuts to a static shot of Bebe's face or just his eyes, where he's just looking straight at the viewer, looking like straight at the viewer, not at him, but even through the viewer. And it's replicated here, but this time his eyes are just like completely ragged and defeated and like lost all energy. Like for once, something has overcome this cosmic being and cosmic power, which is just scary. I can't wait for the fourth movie. It's scary. And the music. The opening is iconic, and I like it too, but I really like the spooky, scary ending they start using from, I think it was episode 3 onwards. But the real winner for me in terms of music is the ending to Rebellion. I really, really like the ending music, the music used during the ending credits of Rebellion. It's really good. I still listen to it a lot. So there's that. Outside of Madoka, so that's it for anything directly correlated to Madoka. This video had lots and lots of technical issues, which required roundabout solutions, leading to some delays. It's not the only reason why this video was delayed, but it certainly was the most frustrating of the bunch of reasons that caused this video's delay. And as far as the next video is concerned, as is tradition, I don't fucking know what next video I'm going to make. There's a couple targets from the current season that I'm kind of interested in because there's been a lot of buzz about them, namely Freerun, but that's not done, so probably not that one. Arknights, Perish to Frost, because I just really like Arknights. Protocol Rain, I hear that one's exceptionally terrible. And then 100 Girlfriends, because I have someone I talk to a lot who gasses the shit out of that anime, so I'm kind of interested in it. Then there's also Apothecary Diaries, which I haven't heard anybody talk about, but I've heard a few rumblings about which have kind of got me interested, so that's it. Don't be surprised if the next video is one of those 5, but I guess don't also be surprised if I end up making a video on something else. I don't know. It's likely. Who the fuck knows what I'm going to make? Even I don't know, so how can you know? So that's it. Okay. Outro's done. Once again, thank you so much for watching. And thanks for sitting through all that shit as usual. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.